Welcome back to Greenplum Summit 2020, our very own reimagined digital customer conference. My name is Jacques Eistock, and our next guest is Chris Blahnik from Dell. Chris has graciously agreed to take some time to speak with our very own Ivan Novick, who you may remember is the product manager for Greenplum from VMware Tanzu R&D. So Chris and Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jacques. So, Chris, thanks for joining us on this interview today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you want to start out by giving a quick background on yourself and what you do for your day job?
Sure. I've actually been at Dell for about 14 years now, across a lot of different roles: sales, operations, outsource management, warranty, services, database marketing, email automation, BI, and data science. So I've been in a lot of different places. I'm currently in marketing, and I'm in a group that covers a suite of database functions for our global marketing database. And this covers data ingestion, quality and governance, privacy, entity resolution, digital identity and device graph, customer engagement and buyer journey, et cetera. And within all of that, I'm the marketing product owner for digital identity and customer engagement insights. And so that's the collection, engineering, automation, and insight generation. So the data science on top of the data engineering for customers engaging with Dell content.
So when you look at it from a perspective of a marketing department, what's the high-level business goal that a marketing department wants to achieve by leveraging their data? What is their main kind of North Stars or objectives of to how to, what's the purpose of looking at that?
The thing that we're marching toward right now is personalization at scale. And this is using customer insight and information at a very granular level to customize content such that when you're looking across your devices or across touch points with Dell, that it's a cohesive experience with messaging, with the brand, with the content correlating to your step in the buyer journey or the product ownership lifecycle, and have all of the parts kind of aware of each other.
So could I say more relevant conversations with the customers from?
Absolutely. Right touch point, right messaging, right contact, right time.
Okay. And then do you work with Greenplum on
Yeah. Yeah. So within the ownership of the digital identity and customer engagement insights, our data warehouse for this customer data is Greenplum. The digital stuff is over in Hadoop within our data center. So, and that's because in Greenplum we have, the more fancy NVMe storage, which is just not really conducive to hundreds of terabytes of very granular data when our basic database processes are, at a higher roll-up level. So we work across both of those, mostly in Greenplum.
So since you said Greenplum and Hadoop, the first thing that comes to mind is PXF. So do you guys use any PXF to interface these?
Absolutely, and that's a really exciting feature. The traditional methodology here is you have database A, some pipeline and some automation system between them, and database B, and you build an individual job to move the data one way or the other, and then check it and schedule it, troubleshoot it when it breaks, et cetera. And PXF is a game changer when it comes to that, because we can, especially the way that we're building our products with dynamic configurability, we can simply point a function within Greenplum to a configuration list of where an external data source lives. We already know what the host is for Hive, so all I have to do is give the name of a Hive table, and the function and the configure work is already built, and it can go grab the file location for it. So huge tables of digital data, clicks on our website, impressions on our ads, et cetera, can live in Hadoop and be readable right there in Greenplum. And so we can roll it up in memory and store only the high level insights and attributes in Greenplum.
So you mentioned something about, you were alluding to something like reproducibility or, so in our previous conversation, you talked about dynamic SQL. So and you mentioned dynamic SQL is very important for your use case. So can you explain a little bit about what is dynamic SQL and then how do you leverage that in your process?
Absolutely. And when we give our demos to our kind of internal stakeholder audiences, I describe it as code that writes its own code, high level. And that's where we kind of create a template of, the real most basic, of course, is data ingestion. You're going to have your insert, upsert, full refresh capability. And that's a generic thing, right? If you're doing an upsert, you're going to take your identity column, join the rows together and get the most recent value from your new source and do your update, et cetera. So that's a template. And so we store the template and everything that makes it unique to your data source becomes a parameter. The parameter can get stored in a business configurable or accessible table. And the dynamic SQL doesn't have to get touched once it's built. And the benefit there, the outcome there is that we don't need allocation of resources and headcount to make a change for a new data source. Somebody who knows the data makes a change to a configuration, and there's our table in the database. So it really accelerates by a lot. One example of traditional process versus proof of concept with PXF. We're talking about months versus minutes in some of these examples. So it's really exciting, and it enables us to focus our human attention on complex or custom use cases instead of things that are clearly repeatable.
What would have taken months? Why would it be months before, do you think?
Back and forth, of course, and it's when teams are working on multiple work streams. And so today I'm working 30 minutes on this thing. I need to ask the vendor about a file thing, or, I need to go and do some discovery work. I need to do my thing in a release cycle on a 2-week sprint window. So if I miss it this time, I have to wait till next time. And so we take all of that human work out of it, and that human work is scheduled in that person's own schedule, as well as the schedule timeline of how we do our release cycles. And it's an agile method, but everybody's working on a lot of things at once. So if you can take the reliance of repeatable stuff away from teams that, it put it on the requester of the data, for example, where you fill out a template and you're filling out from the vendor's documentation of their data type. And so, take some of that manual stuff out of there and make a tool set that automates these capabilities.
So, for example, you're saying that you would how often do you get a new data source that you'd want to look at?
In the digital space, that's quite often, and it grows and it balloons. So we're, building out our global marketing database, and internal stakeholders are, new use cases come to mind, new technologies. Oh, we're building out this new digital events platform, for example. So we're going to need to get the data for that. These marketing automation, email platforms, we need the feedback information from that. Mm-hmm. So in any given sprint, which is, a 2-week cycle, we've got dozens of new data sources coming in.
Dozens in every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've constantly got new stuff coming in, new use cases continually growing. In my own product ownership, I've got almost 100 different data sources, and they're quite large.
And where will they drop these data sources for you?
We have some internal tools that are kind of like a SFTP, and then it ends up in the database.
Does it end up in the data lake, and then you have to pull it in through there?
Yeah, it's in the cluster, and within the it's accessible to Greenplum.
So do you access it through the PXF to get that new data source?
When it's external, when it's the big data, yes. And we do this dynamic stuff everywhere. So it's also within tables that are ingested the normal way to base tables in Greenplum. We still want to take that data, map it to something else, roll it up, standardize it, put some taxonomy to it, and put it in a usable location where applications can read from there. So, for example, the data scientists that are putting together, customer journey analysis that looks sequences across all these different touch points and all these different vehicles, and you imagine all the formats of these various data sets from various providers and platforms. We don't want the data scientists to spend all their time trying to figure out how to join the data and map it to a customer identity or to a product name. So this is where we automate entity resolution and string matching, and the dynamic SQL is kind of the glue where we're able to just say, oh, you want that table, fill out this form. Now that table is in this data set that you're already using.
So you mentioned a few entity resolution and string matching. So with the Greenplum analytical libraries, which libraries do you see on a daily basis or on any basis some sort of a really good use case for that you could leverage or get even in the future that you think you might be able to leverage?
Basically, everything that was on the call today is currently, or it's either deployed, well, not everything, but the suite of things, the examples from all of them are deployed or are in development actively right now. So we use the graph methodology in MadLib for our device, user and device graph. We're using some of the fuzzy string matching that's in it's a Postgres extension in Greenplum, but we're also exploring with Radar the GP text, so that's exciting. And then the scoring on entity resolution using that fuzzy matching uses MadLib. For example, we use the regressions for scoring and predicting the match. So all of that, again, is wrapped up in the dynamic SQL. So really what we're doing is creating a generic capability that says entity resolution, taxonomy, hierarchy recognition. But imagine how many different ways you can describe your laptop. It's a Dell Latitude, it's a Latitude 9410, it's a Latitude 14, it's Latty, it's NB for notebook. And then multiply that times all 3,000 products that we've, had over the years, and then transpose that onto every other hierarchy of taxonomy that you could think about: regions, countries, cities, states, job titles, and industry codes. So the idea is to have a generic capability that you can apply those use cases to. And so that again goes back to the scalability of capabilities and not use cases when you design and build something.
Once you've built out these generic utilities, so how would the day in the life look like for, let's say, the analyst or the data scientist? If there's a new data set or or new types of analytics, would they have to go back to the DBA at some point to enable this data set, or is it now become, how much of it's self-sufficient from the user side at this point?
It is, and I operate, again, when I was describing my role earlier, all of those things were the business side. I've never been in IT. And then, talking about YAML files, for example, in the previous presentation, we as users of the database don't have access to that stuff. So when I'm designing out these solutions, these end-to-end data products, I'm always thinking about the user of the data. So who is in the database, who is actually using the data, not, engineering the solution. So our stakeholders and our campaign targeting engagement teams and our data scientists are going to production tables and views. And so getting something new in there, to your point, we can't have to go through these release cycles to ask the DBA to go do something. Now, getting data into the warehouse is one thing. But once it's there and we want it merged into a product, for example, the customer engagement logging product that feeds the journey insights, that's more of just filling out a template in a macro. And we as business users can push those configurations into the tools that then consume them. And we're building it in ways where you can push different configurations that use the same tools to create different outcomes. So aggregations versus logs versus taxonomy maps, et cetera. And we're stacking all these capabilities together in these reusable functions. And even the dynamic SQL is wrapped in dynamic SQL So a couple of the functions like dynamically create the dynamic SQL to generate the SQL that you then execute. And it gets really like, you kind of get cross-eyed when you're looking at the stuff, but once you built it, you just use it, right?
Right.
You don't have to touch it again. So that's the exciting part. So the day in the life is you fill out a thing, your data shows up, in a week or a day, depending on how big the data set is. And you go about your business using the data set you've already written into your code as a data scientist.
And how would you keep track of, if you've got so many data sources, how do you keep track of what the data sources are and where they are and what's in them?
Yeah, we have a number of different tools. There are some user accessible things. You can go to a web UI internally and browse the contents and request access for various schemas and tables in the database. Product owners like myself are responsible for documenting individual column names, for example. So if I introduce a consumption layer or package layer data set for people to use, I need to go through and say, well, this field is meant to capture this attribute of that visit, to the page, and all these things here. And we also give some, instruction on how to use the data, where the join keys are, et cetera. And then, of course, we have extensive logging. We'll log the code that's actually executed. So you can watch it scrolling on the screen, as it's dynamically creating itself and executing. But we log all of that so we can go back and read it and troubleshoot it. We even used a thing from an old Pivotal blog where you can, before you execute the dynamic SQL, you can get the explain plan for it. And so we took that code and implemented it in the executor for the dynamic SQL. We're capturing even the predicted, what optimizer is being used and what is the cost for the query plan, et cetera.
So if I go up one level, let's say I'm a VP of marketing and I'm not really a technical person, then do you expose these things through applications? Like, does this create like a series of applications which have GUIs and that the end user gets to see, or does it go through Tableau kind of a thing? Or
right, yeah, it depends on the product. A lot of the stuff that I work with goes to the data scientists, or it goes as triggers into campaign type of marketing actions.
Well, so if it's going into trigger into a campaign, that means it's being operationalized then, not just being looked at by somebody.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, this is kind of full scale, where some of the stuff that we're building is served as triggers into a marketing automation platform. Some of it goes and gets aggregated into, for example, rep notes on Salesforce leads. Some of it goes into dashboards to talk about what your account set is doing. As I as a sales rep want to go view how my account set is engaging or not with marketing campaigns or touch points, et cetera. So it can be in a lot of different places. It really depends on the particular use case.
Right. And for the things that feed back into operational systems, then are you able to track the results of that and then improve those systems and kind of iterate on that at all?
Not there yet, but I want to be. I would love to be able to trace the data through this ecosystem and measure the impact. And that's kind of where the data scientists are involved. Like, okay, you use this data set to make your prediction. How did it improve the accuracy of your prediction? How did your prediction improve personalization? How did that improve engagement? How did that impact the sales cycle? There's a long chain there. We're working on it. But it's ground up type of thing. So I'm kind of in the intermediate layers now after having built a lot of the underlying pipeline stuff.
Right. So let's say I was hired on at Acme Corporation, a fictional company, to build out the data infrastructure. What would be some of your top one or two advices that we should keep in mind when building a data infrastructure that you think will make it succeed?
Absolutely. I always, and this goes all the way back to one of the courses at university, and the first day of, I can't remember what course it was, but they started out with the 7 habits of highly effective people and begin with the end in mind. And the end here is, imagine your use case and what is it that you need to build, right? I want to build this thing where I store my customer data. Okay, your customer data comes from this CRM platform. Great. Well, are you always going to just use that? Or are you going to have many customer platforms? Or are you going to have other things? And so you start to build out in your mind you give an inch, and what is the mile that they're going to come back and ask for, and build for that mile, parameterize that inch. And, it's building capabilities, not use cases. So the capability is to go distance, and the use case is a particular inch of it.
When you say building capability, you're talking about software infrastructure or processes?
Yeah, building a capability like entity resolution you think about that in a generic way, right? And the particular use case could be customer identity, or it could be taxonomy, or it could be any number of other things, address matching, et cetera. But the concept of entity resolution is very generic. And so how can you make a generic functionality that works for any or most, it's a Pareto thing, right? But works for most use cases. And then how do you automate that so that you don't have to touch it again?
Right. Sounds good. You're making me want to stop creating the software and go out and start using the software. It sounds fun. So
yeah, that's why I'm always there. I'm always between I want to use it, but I got this other idea.
Yeah. So thanks, Chris, so much for sharing a quick day in the life. I think I think people are going to want to get out and do more. As far as the dynamic SQL thing you mentioned, it sounds like a really important point. It's a generic concept people can just go and Google about, or
yeah, I found most of what I mean, we have been developing it and figuring it out as we go. We find stuff on, Stack Exchange or whatever. There's documentation in Postgres and in Greenplum for how to run it. And then there's just being clever about the things you would go and look up. And you can do this in any database, but if you're going to go look up metadata, automate the lookup of that metadata and make it work for you. If you're going to take metadata like column name and data type, wrap that into something that generates your SQL for you.
Sounds good. So I'm really impressed by what you guys are accomplishing out at Dell Technologies, and thank you so much. And we'll turn it back over to our MC. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much for talking, both Chris and Ivan. I love the experience, the continued explorations of Greenplum's capabilities. I feel a little bit like I could actually sit here and listen to you guys for a couple hours, but unfortunately we don't have that time. So thanks again.